I don't put any advertising or sponsorship on this show, but if you enjoy the show and you'd like to say thanks by, say, buying me a coffee, why not head over to 5minutebiographies.com/coffee to see how.
Welcome to Season 8 of the 5 Minute Biographies podcast. Here is your host, Wayne Armstrong.
Hi guys, welcome to the 5 Minute Biographies podcast, Season 8, Episode 3, Stan Laurel. Born on the 16th of June 1890 in Ulverston, Lancashire, England, Arthur Stanley Jefferson, known later to the world as Stan Laurel, was the son of a theatre manager from Bishop Auckland called Arthur Jefferson and an actress from Ulverston called Margaret. He was born in his grandparents' house and spent a lot of time with his grandmother Sarah growing up, as both of his parents were very busy with theatre life. Stanley was initially educated at King James I Grammar School in Bishop Auckland before he moved with his parents to Glasgow, where he attended Rutherglen Academy. Growing up around the theatre, it was natural for him to become involved, and at the age of 16 he gave his first professional performance in pantomime and music hall, during which he adopted one of his famous comedy devices, the humble bowler hat. By the time he turned 20, Stanley joined the acting troupe of Fred Karno, the pioneer of slapstick, and toured the USA. During this time he was for a short time an understudy to one of the other actors in the troupe, the one and only Charlie Chaplin. The First World War had begun while Stanley was in the USA, and although he registered for military service on the 5th of June 1917, he was never called up due to deafness and his status as a resident alien. In 1921 he met his future long-term comedy partner Oliver Hardy when they both appeared in the film The Lucky Dog. At this point in time, though, neither of them knew what the future would hold for them. Around the same time, Stanley met May Dahlberg, and the pair stayed together for around 6 years, although they never married. It was she that suggested that he change his stage name, which at the time was Stanley Jefferson. She said that it was unlucky due to it having 13 letters, and so Stanley settled on the name Laurel. Shortly afterwards, he landed his first film contract and appeared alongside May in the film Mud and Sand in 1922. The contract didn't last long due to a reorganisation at the Universal Studio, but it was enough for Stanley to decide to leave the theatre and concentrate on filmmaking. His next contract was for 12 films with Joe Rock, although one stipulation was that May Dahlberg was not allowed to be in any of them, as Rock thought that she was having a negative effect on Laurel's career. She wasn't going to go away lightly, though, and her meddling prompted Rock to offer her cash and a one-way ticket back to her home in Australia, which she accepted in 1925. The 12 films were all two-reelers. Produced during 1924 and 1925, they included West of Hot Dog, The Snowhawk, and The Sleuth. On the 13th of August 1926, Stan Laurel married his first wife, Lois Nelson, and their daughter, also called Lois, was born on the 10th of December the following year. The couple would go on to have a son, whom they called Stanley, in May 1930, but unfortunately he was born 2 months premature and only lived for 9 days. Laurel and Lois would go on to divorce in 1934. Stanley's next contract was with the Hal Roach studio, where he met up again with Oliver Hardy, who was working on a film called Yes, Yes, Nanette, under the name of Babe Hardy. Stan Laurel had initially signed with Hal Roach with the intention of writing and directing, but when Oliver Hardy was injured and hospitalised, Stan filled in for him. When Hardy returned to work, the pair began to work together and from 1927 appeared in several short films, including Duck Soup and With Love and Hisses. It was obvious that the pair had chemistry, and they had also become good friends. This, along with the audience reactions to their films, led them to being teamed up for more, culminating in the Laurel and Hardy series later in the year. The pair made a large number of short and feature films over the next few years, and in 1932 they won an Academy Award for Best Short Subject for The Music Box. A contract dispute between Stan Laurel and Hal Roach led to a short period where they didn't work together, but Stanley returned to the studio after the case was dropped. The films made after this period included A Chump at Oxford and their last film for Hal Roach, Saps at Sea. In 1935, Stanley married Virginia Ruth Rogers, known as Ruth, but in 1937 he filed for divorce, stating that he hadn't gotten over Lois. However, after Lois decided that reconciliation wasn't a good idea, he went on to marry Vera Ivanova Shuvalova, better known as Ilyana. This marriage was very volatile, and the pair divorced in 1940. In 1941, Stanley remarried Ruth, but they divorced again in 1946. On 6th of May the same year, Stanley tried marriage for the fourth time when he married Ida Kateva Raphael. This time it would last, as the pair remained married until Stanley's death. Laurel and Hardy signed for 20th Century Fox in 1941 and were contracted to make 10 films over the next 5 years. Initially they were only signed as actors, but as the films became massively popular, they were granted more freedom to add their own material. 6 of the films were completed before Fox suddenly cancelled all B-movie film production in 1944. After the Second World War, Laurel and Hardy undertook a tour of the United Kingdom, including a royal variety performance in front of King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, allowing Stanley to revisit his music hall days. The pair were met by huge excited crowds of people everywhere they went, and they were somewhat bemused by how popular they were outside of the USA. The tour was in fact so popular that Laurel and Hardy spent the next 7 years on the road touring around the UK and Europe. Shortly afterwards, Stanley found that he had diabetes, and he encouraged Oliver Hardy to find some solo projects, which he did, starring alongside John Wayne and Bing Crosby. In 1950, the pair were invited to make a film in France, which they did, but both were seen to be ill during filming, and the resulting film was a disaster. They returned to the USA to recuperate, but in 1952 and 1953 they toured Europe again. However, Stanley fell ill during the tour and was unable to perform for a number of weeks. The tour was ultimately cancelled in May 1954 after Oliver Hardy had a heart attack. A television series called Laurel and Hardy's Fabulous Fables was being planned during 1955, but the plans were delayed when Stanley suffered a stroke. He recovered from this, but as the pair were planning on getting back to work, Oliver suffered a massive stroke which led to him retiring. He died on the 7th of August 1957, something which Stanley never really got over, refusing to perform either on film or on stage. Stan Laurel had always been a heavy smoker, but he suddenly quit in 1960. However, in January 1965 he had a number of x-rays taken due to an infection on the roof of his mouth. He suffered from a heart attack on 19th of February the same year, and 4 days later, at the age of 74, he died, and he was interred at Forest Lawn Hollywood Hills Cemetery. According to IMDb, Stan Laurel appeared in 188 films. He also has 60 writing credits and 12 director credits. Stanley once quipped that, "If anyone at my funeral has a long face, I'll never speak to him again." At the funeral, Buster Keaton said, "Chaplin wasn't the funniest. I wasn't the funniest. This man was the funniest." I hope you enjoyed that episode of 5 Minute Biographies. If you did, why not say thanks by buying me a coffee? Head on over to 5minutebiographies.com/coffee to see how.
Thanks for listening to the 5 Minute Biographies podcast at www.5minutebiographies.com.